walk you through tonight a little bit about why the pay gap occurs. I'm going to talk about how you could probably look at it within your own organisation, some analysis that you can do. Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you senseless with lots of analytics and numbers, but I will put up some charts that just show you how you can perhaps look at this. And then I'm going to also talk about perhaps what you can do to change as well. Okay, I put this on a bit of a continuum, but these are the major factors that I see that really contribute to the pay gap. And it can be any one of these or a multitude of these that will actually impact your organisation. So one of the biggest is that we know is the inequality in starting pay rates and negotiating styles. And so immediately for a lot of organisations that operate pay ranges, that may not be a rate of pay just for the job, it means that we can start to see males and females being treated differently from the moment they start in the organisation. Now that's a significant factor because catch-up after that is really hard to achieve. And so that's something that we have to be really careful of. The bias in performance assessments which affect, performance assessments is, your performance ratings if you do those in your organisations, but consequently that can have an impact on pay as well. And here we've got some of those gender stereotypes that might come through in terms of how people consider performance. He's big and bold and aggressive. Great, he's exactly what we want. When a female displays similar characteristics, it may not be such a great thing and may be rated differently. So we have to check in on our own unconscious and conscious bias that might occur. Promotions, if you're an organisation that is about growing your talent, and more organisations are about this, because we can't always bring talent externally into our organisation. Talent pools are shrinking, all of that good stuff. So we seek to grow our talent, succession planning, all those good things. So if we've got inequality in promotion rates and how we might look at males and females, that becomes an issue. Think about women that might be working part-time. Think about women that might seek more flexibility. They may be seen as somebody less able to be promoted because they have different priorities. So it's a checking in point. Flexible work hours, we all know about that. Impact of long-term career breaks, so that really is about parental leave and how you're treated often before you go on parental leave, during and after, and that whole kind of catch-up. There's a lot of research that says for a lot of women, they may have been high performers going on parental leave before so, and when they come back, because of their different work arrangements, suddenly they're not so high performing. Is that a perception or is that a reality? So flexibility is a really big issue. Few females in succession pipelines. Just about every organisation I go to where I look at pay equity for them, the first thing I look at is what is the distribution of males and females across your different banding levels, grades, or however you look at that. And you will see, without an exception, an overrepresentation of females in lower level roles and a higher representation of males in higher paid roles. Immediately, if you've got that pull apart, you will have a pay gap. And it's a fundamental issue. If you want to really be serious about closing a lot of these inequities, you have to fundamentally start getting females up that pipeline. And then I just touched on before the impact of unconscious and conscious bias. There's no organisation I've dealt with that would say that I've deliberately set out to do things the way they have, and I would agree with that. But the unconscious bias just does creep in. All right, so to me, there's some of the fundamentals. And then when we look at this, when we look at the key areas of focus, which often is around that offer and acceptance, performance criteria, promotion criteria, and annual compensation or annual salary review type stuff, if you've got a combination of 2 or 3 of these kind of decisions being out of kilter, then it will contribute to the existence of your unexplained pay gap. So it's cumulative, and so it's not a one answer response to dealing with the pay gap. it's a multitude of things. And when I talk to organisations, I would say to them is, if you have a diversity strategy, you need to look at this from a fully integrated way. It's not just deal with that, pay them more over here, you have to deal with a whole lot of systemic issues. Okay, so when we look at it in three ways. So look at it from an organisational wide perspective. So often, and I was just chatting before, people will look at it and say, oh, we're okay, we've only got a 2% or a 4% pay gap, we're pretty okay. But actually, when you start to do your analysis down by level and then by job, you will see that 2% or 4% becomes something quite different. And what I mean by that is that you can have some jobs or levels that might be 10% below and some that might be 5% above, and then they all average out to, guess what, 2%. So it disguises your issues, and what we want to encourage is for you to really start peeling the onion, so to speak. One of the things that I've really come to understand doing this work is this statement: the lack of visibility of critical information by decision makers and how decisions are made and applied is a major contributor to the pay equity issues. I'll give you an example. Your recruitment team or your managers in one area of your business may be hiring, let's take an analyst position because everybody kind of understands them. They're hiring an analyst. They hire it for their area. They don't know what others are being paid necessarily in that pay range. They make a decision. They bring them into the organisation on a starting rate. They have no further information to know that actually they've just brought in a female at this rate and actually all the males might be at this rate. They don't have that information. Or the recruiters may not have looked right across the organisation to look at all of that job family, that occupational class together to understand what is happening around that. So what we want to do is start bringing more information to the right people when they're making decisions. And I've got a couple of ideas on that I'll chat about a bit later. So organisational wide, that's just as a whole group. Like for like will be, by level, will be by, say, your grade, if you operate grades or bands or levels, however you might look at that in your organisation. And then like for me is really two things. One is you and I are doing the same job. You happen to be a male, I happen to be a female. What does that mean? Like for like, also from an equal pay perspective, and most of you will be aware of Terra Nova and the College of Midwives and now the mental health workers. It's all about comparability, work of equal value to another job that may not be the same. And how does that actually relate? So if you've got jobs in your organisation that may be female dominated and they're not necessarily being paid by some equivalent to a male-dominated role at a similar level, that could be an issue for you. And I would just flag that with all of these claims now coming to the fore, this will be becoming a more regular conversation. And so best do the work, so great that you're here. So when I start looking at analytics for this particular issue, first thing I would say is garbage in equals garbage out, okay? So if you've got crap foundational data, you will have a real issue understanding your problems. So here's a bit of a laundry list of things that I would encourage you to start looking at by employee, by organisation, by level, by like for like. And so you can see there at the top of the list, gender, what a surprise. But you may also want to include ethnicity if you gather that. And I would encourage you to start thinking about that because we do know there's almost a double jeopardy for people that may be of a different ethnic background to, a European. It can be a double whammy. So I would encourage that. Base rates, as you would expect, I tend to work across a bunch of things. So base pay rates, so what is that you're getting as your fixed remuneration each fortnight? But I also look at things like the variable pay. The variable pay is incentives, bonuses, anything and everything that you might pay to your people, and how are those decisions being made. So you need to look at all of those kind of components. Start rates, not just start dates, and time and role gives you a feeling, and I'll show you an example of this in a few minutes. Gives you a feeling of, have we got people that might have been here for like 20 or 30 years, and then that explains why they may be a real anomaly and pulled apart from the rest of the cohort. We can explain that. But it might also be if we've got somebody that's brand new in the role and paid really high versus existing people, that's an unexplainable pay gap. Well, it's not unexplainable, I just explained it, but it's not acceptable as a pay gap, I should say. So things like this, I would make your laundry list and start collecting all of your employee information together. Okay? And as I said, we're looking at it by organisational level, banding, and then like for like. Okay, so this is actually a real life example that I have here. This is a company that I did some work with not so long ago. And so here, organisational wide, I've looked at, first question I said, tell me what the distribution is or the ratio between males and females. Very simple. But then we looked at it and said, okay, let's have a look at your bands, and where do males sit and where do females sit? Now, males happen to be the yellow bar and females in the dark bar. Now, I could pull this chart out for every organisation I deal with and it would look reasonably the same. How scary is that? Because we actually know in New Zealand, and New Zealand's not untypical of other countries, that sort of 80% of our females in jobs are in lower paying jobs. So we've got to do something about that. So when you start looking at this, you can immediately see why you might have an overall pay gap, because you've got more of your males at the very top end of your organisation and more of, in this particular case is unusual, but more of your females at the lower ends. Straight away, issue. So why have we got that occurring? And I would say the first thing that I would be thinking in my head is, what's my recruitment strategy? Where am I going to find my talent? How am I pipelining some of these females and males through our organisation to achieve change? So this particular organisation, when I looked at their pay gap, was actually 19% pay gap. They have a problem. Okay, so this is actually real data. And what I did, I tend to take it down to an hourly rate, even though you could, and I do it all on annualised as well, but hourly rate kind of just feels a bit crunchy to me. You kind of get it when you look at it and say, that's a $7 difference, or almost $8 difference between males and females in this organisation. And it equals a 19% pay gap. So yeah, the reason they called me in was the board were worried, and they should be. This is a listed company, actually. So that's your first level of analysis right there, organisational wide, find your problem. And so we started peeling the onion. And what I wanted to look at was what was happening with the performance ratings and what was happening with the average pay increases. And so what I've got plotted along the bottom here is really the performance outcomes. And what you can see here is that, in fact, in this one it's opposite, but females are yellow, males are the grey box. And so males were actually being rated higher, generally, than females. But even when we were starting to look at how they were being paid or receiving pay increases, we're starting to see the line pull apart, even though they may have been rated on a similar level. So what that is saying to us is, why are we getting differentiated increases. Now, one thing this company did last year, and why we see a bit of a spike for females here, is they were trying to correct some problems. They were trying to correct it last year, and so they put more in their budget to close the gap, but in fact it was happening everywhere. Then I looked at, as I mentioned, the variable pay. So variable pay is like incentive pay. And this company has a very structured incentive scheme, which would be quite typical for a number of organisations. So immediately what we're seeing here is that when we're looking at the payouts by gender, males are receiving higher variable pay generally than the females. And again, I've got to say, I see this time and time again. Then I started to look at everything by level, and level being, by bands. So the bands are now down this line. And then I've looked at, okay, what's that distribution of males and females? And then we've looked at what is the base salary. How does that look? Where's it actually happening? And what you can see here is actually it's tracking along reasonably okay to a point, and then we've got a real dip happening. There's dips happening in some of these very senior levels where we've got higher representation of males versus female. So again, that just gives us another lens to start to say, okay, here it's diverging, what's going on, what's happening in that particular area. And so when I looked at it a little bit closer, I started doing, now there's pages of this, I've just given you a snapshot, but this is an example of when we started to really look at that by banding, by level, to start understanding that big pay gap. So here I've looked at the average female hourly rate, a number of employees that may be in these levels, these bands, and their average length of service. And then we looked at it by male. Now, if I just get you to look at that first line, you'll see we've got 17 females, average length of service is almost 7 years. We've got 4 males, and they've got an average length of service of $3 3 years. There's a $1.59 pay gap, which actually is expressed as 6.5%, but in favour of females. So it goes both ways, right? You can't always think this is just a pure female thing. So I would explore that just as much as I would be exploring a negative. Here's probably an interesting one. You've got, in level 6, you've got 60 females, 49 males, average length of service 6 years, average length of service almost 8. There's a 3.5% pay gap. If you pick that apart, that again, go down another layer, you might actually find that most of that might be explainable. Okay, it depends on that, what's going on there. But if you start coming down here, and the ones that are highlighted in yellow, what we're starting to see here is length of service, and the pay gaps are starting to really pull apart. So this is now starting to get to the heart of why we've got a big gap, what's happening. And when we did another layer of analysis again underneath this, the question was asked, we started to really looking at people in a job against a job and starting to say why, what decisions went into where this person is. So this is all averages, we might look at one person, it might have skewed the whole data. If we take that anomaly out, what does it look like? Does it make sense or does it not? This one here is when I started looking at the same role, and I've just taken the names out for obvious reasons of the job titles, but I wanted to start to break it down again and look at the roles and then figure out what is happening around the average length of service again, males to females, and what's happening. So in this particular job, and I know the sample of one is pretty difficult, but look at the length of service, will you, on this top line. So this person is a female, had 4.5 years of service, paid $55.69 per hour, which is pretty good. Males had been here a couple of months, paid $16 more. Now that's quite common in organisations, and now this is where you have to start thinking about, well, actually we have to buy talent from time to time. We will have to bring them into the organisation at higher rates, but then you're creating some big gaps. So what are we doing about the internal relativity concerns that might raise? Yeah? And you can see, and once you just start scanning through, it's really interesting. This one here, average length of service 3.5 years, average length of service 23 years. So yeah, you would expect to see a pull apart, wouldn't you? So then I drill down one more layer and find out, well, is it because, and I do know they've got people with very long service in this company, so if we put them over here, how does the rest look? Are we making good decisions? So once you just got to keep cutting it down and starting to look at it through different lenses every single time. I haven't given you the whole deck of everything that I would do, but it gives you a flavour. And one of the things that I create is actually a dashboard. Now, for companies where you're having to report up to your boards, particularly listed companies, I know we've got a couple in the room, then you've really got to start explaining and reporting and making it very clear about where things are happening. So this is actually a bit of a what I call a plug and play. It's an interactive dashboard, and you can filter on all of your different areas by gender, by performance ratings, by position and range, by all of sorts of different ways of looking at things, by department, and then you can start to see where it's happening in real time. So this kind of reporting is actually really, really great because you can really see what's going on. Another dashboard that I'm just actually starting to create at the moment, when I was talking about more information is power, is almost like a recruitment dashboard. So if you're recruiting for a job, you can plug in the job, and if you've got it, you know, all your information, such as the hay points or job evaluation points, if you have those, or the level, band level that they're in, we can get that pulled through. So this is the range that you would be paying people through. And by the way, the average pay rate is for this cohort is here, and the average pay rate for that cohort is there. So where are you going to pay relative to that? So more information to those people that are making decisions, really important. At annual salary review time, for those of you that might have larger workforces, when their managers are populating their decisions, show it by gender straight away. One of the things I really strongly recommend is moderation sessions around performance ratings or performance discussions. Do that with almost like a gender agnostic. Don't even think about it from a gender perspective, but go through all your moderation, look at all your recommendations, and then once you've done it, apply your gender lens and your ethnicity lens and see how your decisions fall out. It can be quite surprising when you start to do it that way. So, these sorts of things become really, really useful to you. How am I going for time, Julie? A few more minutes? Yep. I won't read this all out to you because you're going to get the deck anyway, but I just thought I'd just put up some of these little alerts. These are the sorts of things you might hear in your organisation, but at the end of the day, it's just covering an issue. One of the things that, one of the ones that is least understood is probably this one here. Importing a pay gap issue is quite typical. So what I mean by that, and it can happen if you're an internal promotion or an external hire. So again, a female might say, I'm happy to do the job for 80,000. So guess what? They'll get paid 80,000. Male will be, I'm happy to do the job for 100,000. Guess what? 100,000. But it also can happen within a promotion when they say, actually, to put them into that next level, it's going to cost another 30,000 or 10,000 or 5,000, whatever the value, and we can't afford that. So what happens is they get placed low. in their pay range and they never quite catch up. And that happens quite frequently. It's not just a female issue, it does happen with males as well, but it's another contributor. So it's layers and layers of different factors going into this important area. And then I've given you here to some of the actions that you need to take. And this is why I say it's a fully integrated approach to your D&I strategy. You have to look at this through every part of how you touch people. Right, I call it right through from the hire to retire life cycle, from the moment you're advertising out to the market to recruit people, to how you're getting your selection pools. Do you only have males in your selection pool? Well, go back to market and get a better gender representation. Do you have, who's actually making the hiring decisions? Are we making good, balanced decisions? And who's checking in with a gender lens around what the pay rates are? So those are real building blocks. Around the performance review process, it's all about checking moderation, asking the better question. Salary setting is, this is the fundamentals, so that's where you go back to basics. You need to look at your market intelligence, particularly around an equal pay issue. A lot of what I've been talking about is pay equity and equal pay. It's interchangeable for a lot of people. Pay equity to me is if we're doing the same job and how we're being treated. The equal pay is job of a comparable worth. And I would be really starting to look at jobs that may fall into those buckets. A good case in point would be there was 2 massive pay equity claims in the UK. One was a council, looking at Auckland Council over there, not pointing fingers, not at all. But Birmingham City Council had an issue between, I think it was their caretakers and might have been cleaners or something. And it was actually deemed that they were of comparable worth, but they were paid something like £4 differently. That claim was upheld. It's actually cost over $1 billion in reparations. It went back 6 years, and in fact, the council had to sell off some assets to pay for this. So it's significant. There's another example of Asda, which is a massive supermarket chain, and they had females stacking shelves in the supermarket and males stacking shelves in the warehouse, being dominated by either gender. Massive gap. Guess what? Same kind of amounts we're talking about, several $100 million worth of reparations, particularly when you're going back 6 years. So it's not a small thing, and if we think we're immune to that in New Zealand, as you can see with what's just happened with Terra Nova and the college midwives, we are not. Here's some analysis. I'm not going to go for this, it will bore you to tears, so you can take that away and have a little play with it yourselves. So that's what I wanted to run through, but I think for me, when I've been really looking at this, it's get your foundational facts right. Even if you're looking, one thing I didn't mention is, but those bands and career levels or grades where you've got jobs attached to them, one of the fundamental things you've got to do is make sure the job is in the right place to begin with. So if the job is being underbanded, it could actually create an issue. If the job's overbanded, if it's not in the right place, you could see big differences in pay rates relative to what your position and range might be. So those are some of the things that you just need to keep challenging yourself and re-looking at all times.